What's up guys, and welcome back to Training Basics, where I cover all of the essential information you need to know to succeed on your lifting journey. Today's episode will piece together all of the previous episodes regarding sets, reps, and intensity to answer one of the most commonly asked fitness questions: how many reps should be in a set? So if you haven't already watched my first 3 videos and you're looking for a little bit more context, I highly recommend checking them out. But to begin, I'll first start with a really quick overview on sets, reps, and intensity before moving on to the difference between high reps versus low reps. Then I'll talk about using rep ranges instead of rep targets and how to progressively overload with them. And finally, I'll finish off with the pros and cons of low rep ranges, high rep ranges, which one to use for each individual exercise, and how to structure them in your training. So as a quick refresher, a rep is basically when you perform one exercise one time by stretching and contracting your muscle fibers, and a set is just a series of reps all performed in succession. And in order for a set to actually be productive and lead to muscle growth, it needs to be taken close to failure, specifically anywhere within 0 to 4 reps in reserve or reps left in the tank. Anything more and you're not producing any mechanical tension because you're not performing any effective reps. Remember, only those last 5 or so where your concentric noticeably and involuntarily slows down are deemed effective, and if you stop your set at 10 reps when you could have done 15, you're just going to be missing out on all of that meaningful hypertrophy because your set wasn't nearly hard enough to challenge your muscle fibers to grow. So now that we understand that, if it's only those last 5 reps in any set taken to failure that actually matter, why would you ever do anything more than 5? Well, to be honest, you really don't have to. In fact, if your goal is simply to build muscle, then you probably shouldn't be doing much more. Think about it. If you do a set of 15 reps to failure and only get about 5 effective reps, why not just do a set of 7 to failure instead and still get all 5 of those effective reps? Not only will this save you time in the gym, but it will also save you a lot of energy. And when it comes to training effectively, you always want to be as productive as you can with both your time and your body so that every single rep you perform in the gym is serving a purpose. Now you might be thinking, well, surely doing 15 reps has to stimulate more growth than doing 7, right? I mean, after all, you did do more than double the amount of reps. Well, that isn't exactly true. Current research indicates that sets anywhere between 5 and 30 reps actually provide very similar levels of muscle growth when each set is taken to true muscular failure. In other words, doing a set of 5 reps stimulates near identical hypertrophy as a set of 30 reps when both are within 0 to 4 reps in reserve. And if you watched any of my videos regarding training intensity, this would make sense, right? Because regardless of how many reps you do beforehand, it's only really those last 5 before you reach failure that actually contribute to muscle growth. Why? Because this is when your reps actually start to slow down, causing your muscle fibers to produce more force, which then elicits mechanical tension, ultimately driving hypertrophy. So since a set of 7 reps to failure and 15 reps to failure both only contain 5 effective reps, then the amount of hypertrophy stimulated between them will be nearly identical because effective reps, or the last 5, are the only ones producing mechanical tension. Thus, if these two sets produce the same stimulus, then the only real difference between them is that doing 15 reps accumulates more fatigue, which will negatively impact your performance to a greater degree. A small degree, but a degree nonetheless. So if your main priority in the gym is to build muscle, then you always want to program the majority of your exercises in a lower rep range, specifically anywhere within 5 to 12, as this will provide you the greatest amount of stimulus per the lowest amount of fatigue. Now obviously that doesn't mean higher rep ranges are entirely useless, as again they still will provide a very similar amount of muscle growth. It just means that lower rep ranges may be more efficient since you're minimizing the amount of fatigue that builds up throughout your session. So with all of that now out of the way, how exactly do you determine which rep range to use for each individual exercise? Now I'm sure all of you have heard the classic 4x12 for muscle hypertrophy, where you do 4 sets of an exercise for 12 reps each. However, the problem here is that the number 12 is just a random number, right? It's an arbitrary target that is predetermined by you before even starting your set. And if you're actually training close to failure, you just won't know before a set exactly how many reps you're able to perform. Sure, you'll have a general idea going into it, but if you just aim for a specific number like 12, who's to say you didn't just stop your set after hitting 12 reps when you could have done a lot more? Maybe you could have gotten 15, 17, maybe even 20. No one really knows because you only planned on doing 12 and nothing more. Not only does this make it extremely difficult to progressively overload since you're pretty much just doing the same thing every time, but you also have absolutely no idea how many effective reps you performed since you don't know how close to failure you actually were. That's why instead of aiming for a rep target, you always want to aim for a rep range like 5 to 7, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, and so on. That way, instead of going into your set with the idea of hitting a specific number of reps, you instead go into your set with the idea of reaching a specific level of intensity. So for example, let's say you're doing bicep curls in the 8 to 10 rep range and you plan on leaving 0 reps in reserve, or in other words, stopping just before you reach failure. So you do your set making sure each rep is slow and controlled, and after 13 solid reps, you know for a fact you won't be able to finish your next, so you drop the weight and end your set. Now, even though you didn't fall into your desired rep range, you still managed to reach the specific level of intensity that you had predetermined, meaning you know how close you were to failure, and you know for a fact that your set was productive. However, since you were able to do so many more reps than you initially thought, next time you do that exercise, increase the weight until you fall back into the bottom of that that range. So maybe instead of using the 40s, you pick up the 50s, and this time you can only get 8 reps. Then over time, slowly work to progress that weight all the way back up to 10 reps, or the top of that range, before increasing the weight again and repeating the process. This is how you progressively overload while still making sure that every set you do in the gym is productive and close to failure. But keep in mind, it's not always going to be this easy. Yes, obviously you should always go into a session aiming to progress, but unfortunately growth isn't always linear, and it's totally normal to finish a session without being able to add any weight or reps. It doesn't mean you lost muscle, it just means you haven't built enough of it yet. That's why you should never try and force that last rep while sacrificing your form, because at that point you're not really progressively overloading, you're just regressing your form. That being said, if 3 weeks go by and you still haven't progressed, then it's probably time to take a step back, assess your volume, your diet, your recovery, and try and pinpoint exactly what you can improve on in order to keep moving forward. So now that we finally understand rep ranges and how to use them correctly, let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of both and when to use them in your training. Right off the bat, we've already determined that lower rep ranges create less overall fatigue and take less time to perform without reducing the total amount of stimulus. So for exercises that are super systemically fatiguing, like squats, it's probably smarter to stick to a lower rep range so that you're not absolutely gassed throughout the rest of your session. Think about it. Who's going to be more tired? Someone who does 30 squats to failure or someone who only does 5? Assuming you're actually training to failure, then doing 30 reps of squats will probably either leave you unconscious, dead, or even worse, still alive for your next set. So for these kinds of exercises with a lot of limiting factors, or factors that impact the performance of an exercise, like low back strength, core strength, breathing and bracing, or just conditioning in general, it's best to utilize a lower rep range. This allows you to, 1, avoid any of these limiting factors from failing before the target muscle, so like if you had to stop a set of squats because you ran out of breath as opposed to your quads failing, and 2, it minimizes the buildup of systemic fatigue. Because these types of exercises require so much effort from factors other than just the muscle itself, it just doesn't make sense to program them in a high or even moderately high rep range. So for things like squats, pressing movements, rows, deadlifts, and pretty much anything yielding a lot of mental and physical strain, you're much better off choosing a lower rep range, anything between 5 and 8, so that you can still provide the muscle a sufficient stimulus, but without the fatigue becoming absolutely unbearable. That being said, not all exercises have this dramatic effect. For example, doing a set of rear delt flies, even if you're pushing yourself extremely hard to failure, is not going to be nearly as fatiguing as failing a set of squats. Sure, you'll still have to rest and recover, but you won't be nearly as gassed as you would on squats because there's just not as many limiting factors. You don't really have to focus on breathing and bracing, there's not a very high conditioning requirement, and the only thing happening is pretty much the extension of your arm. So for these kinds of exercises where there isn't much systemic fatigue buildup and there's only really one joint action taking place, it may be smarter to incorporate a bit of a higher rep range. This allows you to, 1, induce more metabolic stress, which pumps your muscles up with metabolites, making training more enjoyable because now you look like a slightly less depressed Michelin man, and 2, it may be more comfortable on your joints and connective tissue. While there isn't anything inherently dangerous about doing a set of, let's say, bicep curls for 5 reps, it may place a bit of stress on the joints, especially for those who just aren't used to training with that kind of weight. And although this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it can lead to problems down the line if you aren't managing joint fatigue properly. So if a specific movement pattern, like rowing, is causing you a lot of joint pain or discomfort, it may be worth utilizing a bit of a higher rep range so that you can lighten the weight and still take that set close to failure. So that pretty much sums up the difference between high rep ranges and low rep ranges and how you can go about choosing which one is best, but again, I do recommend prioritizing something low as it will generate significantly less fatigue with little to no drawbacks. So for most people, I recommend programming about 90% of all of your exercises anywhere within the 5 to 12 rep range with heavy emphasis on 5 to 10, and only about 10% of your exercises in the 13 to 20 rep range with, again, heavy emphasis on the lower side. And yes, I know I did say hypertrophy can occur all the way up to 30 reps, but from personal experience, there's really just no reason to go higher than 20. It's taxing, it's time consuming, and it's inconvenient, so just try your best to have 90% within 5 to 12 and 10% within 13 to 20. Obviously, it won't ever be this exact, and you should still choose your own individual rep ranges for each exercise based on your own personal preferences, but putting your primary focus on lower rep ranges will make it easier to manage fatigue, increase your training efficiency, and more precisely take the target muscle close to failure. And that pretty much covers everything you need to know regarding rep ranges and how many reps should be in a set. Now all that's left to explain is how many sets you should do. And that will be covered in my next video where I talk about training volume, so if you're interested in seeing that, as well as tons of others regarding rest times, warm-up routines, and so on, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to show your support, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.